wanted to do was introduce Henry Lynn. You have seen Kristen and Kira yesterday quite a few times, so I think they go without introduction. But Henry Lynn is an assistant professor of pediatrics at the University of Pennsylvania and works as part of the pediatric liver transplant team at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. He completed his GI fellowship training at CHOP and his transplant hepatology fellowship training at Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. He's previously worked in Dr. Nancy Spinner's lab and studied genetic modifiers of liver disease and Alagille syndrome. In addition, he also studies patient-provider communication strategies. And I'm going to ask Henry to just take a minute to just let us know or explain to us how he got involved with the Alliance and Alagille syndrome in particular.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's good to see some familiar faces. So I owe my start to learning about Alagille and getting involved with the Alliance to Dr. Picoli back there, actually. When I was a fellow at CHOP, Dr. Picoli was and still is my boss, actually. And I actually, during training, you do 2 years of research. And so I did my research in Alagille syndrome, worked with Dr. Spinner. And what I studied at that point in time was looking at induced pluripotent stem cells. And so the idea was to say, one of the big challenges is we don't have a great understanding in terms of, what drives liver disease. Why is it that people with the same mutation sometimes can present very differently? And so that was the aim of the research initially. And so we tried to take a different approach. A lot of times we had been checking genes and genetics, and we thought, well, what if we can actually make cells that are liver cells and then actually study those cells directly? And so I think the first time I came to a symposium was actually to draw blood and take skin samples. And I still have little kids that run away when they see me, so I promise I'm not drawing blood this time. I promise. Next time, I don't know, but that hooked me in, and it's been a pleasure. I think this is my third or fourth time coming back now, and it's always great to be here.
Thank you. All right, so just a real quick morning lightning poll. We're getting used to these. So how many of you have participated in a research study of some sort with Alagille syndrome? Wonderful. Okay. More than one study, or have you just done one? So who's done two? Anybody done 2 studies? Okay, we're good. And are you participating in one right now? So raise your hand if you are. Oh, that's great. Okay. And a couple other questions. Have you ever heard of the Alagille Syndrome Alliance or the ALGSA Connect Patient Registry? Oh, yes. That makes me very happy. And what about clinicaltrials.gov? Familiar with that? All right, good. And did you participate in one of the listening sessions that we had either Friday or Saturday night? So we do have a couple of people that did that. Thank you. Okay, so research. What's research? It's really simply, it's a process to discover new knowledge. That's a really basic definition of it. And there are a couple different types of research when it comes to rare disease. So one is basic research, and that happens in the lab. It doesn't involve human subjects. It's basic science in the laboratory. And then you come to clinical research, and I'm going to put Henry on the spot again to just give us a brief definition of clinical research.
Okay. So with clinical research, I think there's a lot of ways to look at it. The way I think of it is, if there's a question or an observation that we see, to say, well, why is it that my child itches a lot? The question then is, well, how do we figure out about this? I mean, we could go and study the basics of what causes itching, or we could say, well, what are things that we could do about it? What are some characteristics of children or adults who do itch? And so that kind of forms, to me, that forms the basis of clinical research. It's basically saying there is a question, an observation that you see, and we go about looking for ways to address it. The most common way that we think about it is to say, well, we have this clinical question, and now are we going to do an intervention? So, like, is there a medication that we can use for itching? And so, do you then split people up into groups where you'll have one group of patients who itch and you give them the medication, another group of patients that itch and you don't give them the medication. So you can really test to see the effectiveness of the medicine. So that's one example of clinical research. There's other types of research that aren't really focused on an intervention. It really focuses more on data gathering. So I imagine for a lot of you guys who have raised your hands of participating in studies, a lot of that is saying, well, let's collect information to help us understand more about the condition of what's going on. So that can include blood tests, that can include just general growth measures, that can include physical exam findings, any of the above. And so clinical research is just a really broad definition. There's many different ways to go about it. Just to summarize, the key thing of what I think of it as is, if there's a question of we're saying, well, why does this happen? What clinical research entails is us going out there and collecting some data, whether it's through observations or if it's through an actual trial, so to speak.
All right. And then, so there's clinical research. There's also translational research. And I'm going to ask Kira to tell us the difference between those two.
Okay, translational research. So Henry, I think, defined clinical research very nicely. Translational research is where you have an observation, usually in a cell-based system or an animal model system, and then you want to translate that to see, does that finding reoccur when you go to a different system? So maybe it's from a cell line into an animal, and you see, if you add a drug or if you take something away, do you see the same changes? And really where translational research gets really exciting is when you can go from preclinical or animal model systems into humans and patients. And if you have, the one thing about animal models is they really are often not reflective of the true clinical situation. So we are not mice and we are not monkeys. Those are all helpful tools, but really the proof of the pudding comes when you try a strategy in a patient, and that's when you're really translating that knowledge and findings into the real setting.
All right. So the focus of most of what we talk about when we talk about the registry, we talk about clinicaltrials.gov, it's people. We focus on people and how a disease affects them, how a drug might help or with a disease. And one of the ways that we can accumulate knowledge about our disease is to have people enroll in our patient registry. And I know several of you raised your hand when I asked about it. And on your the links and resources page that was in your Padfolio, there is the URL for the patient registry. And right now, our patient registry probably has somewhere between, I think it's around 150 people in it. And it really has just basic questionnaires. They're just a couple of health survey type questionnaires. When were you diagnosed? How old was your child? Those type of things. We also have the capability to put up disease-specific questionnaires, which is what we're hoping that we will be able to do in the future. We just haven't had the time to be able to do that until now. However, if you go on and you enroll, you provide your information, probably takes about 10 to 15 minutes to do that. Then in the future, when we put up more detailed surveys, we'll be able to contact you and ask you to complete the additional surveys. Whenever your information is shared from our registry, it's de-identified. Whoever gets the information will not know anything about, will not know no contact information, anything like that. It's just we take the data and we're able to share that with others in a de-identified way. So I would really encourage you, if you haven't signed up for the registry yet, to do so. And it helps us, it helps our whole community to better understand the disease. There's also a network called Children, and it stands for the Childhood Liver Disease Research Network. And what they do, it's a network of 15 institutions around the country, including Canada, that are studying pediatric cholestatic liver diseases. So, and one of those is Alagille syndrome. And the network has been around for 10 years now, and they are funded through, 2019. And they have, at this point, they have what's called a longitudinal study that they're doing, which is a natural history study of cholestatic liver diseases, Alagille syndrome included. And at this point, they have just over 300 children and their siblings with Alagille syndrome that they are collecting data on. You're able to, if you go on their website, if you go on the website, you can find one of the institutions, whatever institution is closest to where you live. And they have research coordinators at those institutions that you can contact about possibly participating in the longitudinal study. And I'd encourage you to do that if you haven't already. And that link is also on the resources page that we gave to you. What else do we have here? All right, so I wanted to give a really quick overview of FDA and what they do when it comes to drug development and what their focus is, which is safety and effectiveness. And I don't know if Kira can do this in like a minute or less, but just really quickly give just a brief overview of how FDA is involved.
Well, before I talk about FDA, I think it's important to talk about, as a parent or a patient, you think about your situation, what happens with you, what's happening with your symptoms, how your disease is progressing. And that's where FDA is entirely different. FDA cares about the population, so the whole population of patients and what happens somewhat on average across the population. So in general, there are 3 phases of studies. There's phase 1, which is usually just pure safety, and then phase 2 is in patients when you're trying to figure out your dose. And then phase 3 is sort of where the rubber meets the road. And that's when you have an idea of your right dose and your right dosing regimen, and you conduct a study, usually a placebo-controlled study where some patients will get drug and some patients will not get drug, to see if there's a difference in whatever you're measuring. And I know we're going to talk later at a drug development session, and the what you're measuring and when you measure it, that's really the most challenging part of clinical research. And it's where tools like the Registry and natural history studies can help, because you can see on average what happens, and you can see if you're making a difference to the normal course of disease.
All right, excellent. You get an A+. So one place to go, or the place to go, if you're interested in participating in a clinical trial. So it might be of a drug, it might be collecting a natural history study. There are all different things that will be listed on clinicaltrials.gov. And at the moment, there are 11 clinical trials listed for Alagille syndrome on clinicaltrials.gov. And 5 of those are actively recruiting for patients to participate. And there will be information on there. So if you go on to clinicaltrials.gov, you put in Alagille, and it'll list out the studies. And then for each study, it will provide you with information about who to contact if you're interested, what the inclusion criteria are for that study, what the exclusion, so what you need to have to participate, what you can't have to participate. And for every study, there are those parameters. But just as an educational kind of thing, it's good to go on there and just kind of see, well, what's happening, and am I eligible to participate? Yes.
Just 2 comments about clinicaltrials.gov. It's actually a pretty horrible website.
Yeah, it is.
It's very un-user friendly. And the information that gets put on clinicaltrials.gov is entirely up to the company. So it's not a complete view of the list of inclusion, exclusion criteria. So it's really important to, if you're interested, to call the nearest center. And usually the phone numbers of who to call and names of who to call are on there, because they'll be able to give you the real picture. So you may think, oh, I qualify for this study, and get really excited and call, and they'll say, oh, sorry, no, you didn't meet this criteria. So it's not a perfect tool, and it's not a complete picture either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. So outside of participating in clinical trials, the registry, children's logic study, what are some other things that you can do to participate in research, or to have some kind of a role in research? And one of those is just, it's speaking, it's sharing your experience. It's participating in the listening sessions that we have, educating pharmaceutical companies, medical students, taking advantage of those opportunities to get out there and tell your story. And Kristen, I was going to ask her to just give you a brief overview of what she was able to do with when you went to the medical school, and you presented your perspective.
The video?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, we are included in the Lumina drug trial. I think I've mentioned to some of you, we are based out of Seattle, so I went to the clinicaltrials.gov, and Emery was so itchy. I was just desperate for something, and so we got included in that group, and she started about a year ago, and after about week 13, we started seeing we saw amazing results, and she's been itch-free since. And so because of that, they had asked that I kind of present our story so that we could share with the pharmaceutical company just how amazing the results are. So Emery and I sat together and made a video and kind of went through our process and shared what our life was like before, and shared pictures, and then what our life was like after, and really just to give a comprehensive look at what a difference for us this drug trial and this particular drug has made for us. But we've just always wanted to just be a voice for Alagille syndrome, whether it be in research or advocacy. And I guess I'd encourage you guys too to not be afraid, even if it's something that you've never really done before, to speak up and be included, because your voice really does matter, and it makes a difference for everybody.
And then if you could talk a little bit about, through NORD, when you went to, you talked about, it was a speaking opportunity with medical students. Did you do that?
That wasn't me.
Okay, never mind.
Should I not be sitting here?
Never mind. That was Teresa Bianchi.
Okay.
Yeah, so I thought it was you, but it wasn't. So through the National Organization for Rare Disorders, there was an opportunity that came up. They sent out, we're an organizational member of NORD, and they sent out a call for someone with rare disease that could come to one of the universities in Connecticut, in the Connecticut area, and get up in front of a bunch of medical students and talk about their disease. And so we thought, Teresa Bianchi, who's an ALGS mom who lives in the Boston area, and we emailed to her and we said, hey, are you interested in doing this? And she just jumped on it, and then in a couple days found herself in front of I don't know how many hundred medical students, but talking about Alagille syndrome. And her son went with her, and her husband, and she just had a great experience, and we got some really good feedback, later that said, thank you, for coming and doing that. And those opportunities come up, occasionally, and we try to post them on our website or just let you know about them, so that if you are willing to go out and tell people about Alagille syndrome, it gives you an opportunity to do that. Yes.
back to the FDA for a minute. For the longest time, it was really hard for patients and patient advocacy groups to interact with the FDA and have their voice heard at FDA. There was really only one opportunity, and that was at the end of the process when an advisory board would be convened to assess whether a drug was worthy of approval, and then their patients could talk. That's changing. So I believe that the era of patient involvement in the drug development process and patient advocacy in particular is now. So this is the time for your voice to be heard. FDA and the European version of the FDA are really opening up their doors to hearing your story and your view on the world. Now, it may not always be the most smooth process, but at least there's a seat at the table now. And I think that's a really exciting and important opportunity for groups like this.
And there's the FDA Patient Representative Program. Perfect segue. And so what that is, what the FDA Patient Rep Program is you actually become I'm not sure what the term is for it, but you get paid an honorarium, a stipend, to go and participate in advisory group meetings and on specific drugs, but also on disease conditions as different therapies are making their way through review at FDA. And they have a whole program, they have training to do this, and I encourage you to check that out as well. And it's a very rigorous review process for you to actually become a patient representative, just warning you about that. They look at a lot of things like conflict of interest and those type of things. But if you have the time and you have the interest, I'd really encourage you to do that as well. And they are really incorporating, trying to incorporate the patient voice more and more in the drug and review process. So, there are a lot of reasons to participate in research. My daughter Elena was in, probably 3 or 4 research studies, starting when she was about 5 years old at CHOP. In one of the studies that they were doing one on pancreatic enzyme insufficiency and growth in Alagille syndrome. When she had her partial external biliary diversion, we flew her to Chicago because Karen Emmerich was doing a study on a diversion in Alagille syndrome. And so she was the first one in that study. And there just are a lot of reasons. I don't have time, unfortunately, to talk about why you should participate. But on the jump drive that we are going to provide you later this morning, all of the presentations with all of the speaker notes will be on those. So I encourage you to read the rest of my presentation and find out about those. If you're interested in more about drug development specifically, one of the deep dives that are just coming up right after this session is on understanding the drug development process. So I will be doing that up in the tower room, and if you have an interest, please come join us. Kira and I will be up there talking about drug development. And I guess, sort of a last thing to say is, if there's an opportunity for you to talk about Alagille syndrome, talk about your experience, whether it's posting on themighty.com or PatientWorthy or any of those websites, I just encourage you to do it because the more we get out there and we talk about our disease and how it affects us, how it affects our children, the more it will become, people will be aware of it. And, it's probably will never become a household word, like ALGS, it just kind of doesn't roll off your tongue. But it gets people interested in it. It gets people motivated to look at it. And I guess sort of one parting example is I was a patient advocate fellow with the Drug Information Association about 4 or 5 years ago. And as part of that, it was just patient group representatives that went to the Drug Information Association annual meeting to meet with drug companies to understand the drug development process better. And I went back the following year as a volunteer, and I talked about Alagille syndrome in one of the sessions. And I actually led a few sessions at DIA. And there was a young woman there who heard me talk, and she is now with a company that picks up on promising research in rare disease and finds the funding to move that research forward. And she and her company are now focused on Alagille syndrome. And it was because she heard me speak and she was intrigued and she followed up on it and she convinced the company that she now works for that Alagille syndrome should be their primary disease that they're looking at. So you never know. You never know when you talk to someone, if they have a connection or they will develop their own interest in this disease. So go out there and tell the world about us. So I think that's it. I don't have time for discussion, unfortunately. At least you each got to hold the microphone one time. And now we're going to head off into our deep dives for this morning. So caring for the caregiver is in here in Crystal. And then transitioning to adult care for young folks, young adults, teens, is in the Presidio Ballroom, which is just down here the hall and around the corner. And I will be up in the tower room on the second floor talking about drug development. And then after those, we will be back in here in Crystal for our ever-exciting teen panel Q&A. And our closing and lunch and all those good things. So go forth and learn some more. Okay. Thank you, guys. And I'm sorry we didn't have time to talk about anything. No, I think that was a great. Thank you. You're in transitioning, you're in